Washington. Joining us now, Republican Senator from Texas, Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, and from Washington, NBC News Chief White House correspondent and political director and host of the Daily Rundown. Well,
I don't know how he does it.
Busy. He's very powerful.
I don't know how he does it.
Chuck Todd joins us now. Good to have you both.
It's no doubt about it. So, Senator, let's begin with you. Is this debt deal dead, or do you see reason?
Pat says it's dead.
Pat Buchanan is being a pessimist this morning. I say
dead.
I say it's never dead. Is the deal dead?
It's never dead.
Never
Washington,
dead.
You know that. It's not dead. I do think, though, that we're now at a crossroads, and we've got to come up with either Plan A or B or C or D.
Yeah.
Well, that just...
So which one will it be?
That's just, wow.
And Plan D. Well, I'll take Plan B.
I'll take A.
It has nothing to do with
I'm just going to close my eyes.
Concentration camps or anything. Chuck Todd, let me ask you, what's your reporting inside the White House this morning?
Well, look, they're still pushing the big deal. They're still trying to figure out if there's a way of the big deal. And the other thing they're pushing is they're telling Eric Cantor and John Kyle that their version, their interpretation of the Biden plan, that Plan B, the 2.5, can't get the votes, and it can't pass. So they're pushing this whole bigger deal. But I got a question for Senator Hutchison. If I told you that a Democratic president was willing to put Social Security on the table, wouldn't you be willing to put taxes on the table, because that's a once-in-a-generational thing where a leader of the Democratic Party will force his base to do something that the base doesn't want him to do?
I do think the president has been very wise and bold in putting Social Security on the table. I also think it's just common sense. When you know that the actuarial table doesn't work anymore, you've got to do something to fix this system, and I think that fix is the right one. The one he's talking about is a good one. I have a Social Security plan on the table that I think is a good one. We should have entitlements on the table. However, you then say, oh, well, but they've got to put taxes in the pot, too. And I just think that if you go out and talk to the business people, especially the small ones in this country, they can't take one more hit and hire people.
What about closing tax loopholes, though? All the tax loopholes that we've heard about, whether it's for oil companies or the type of tax loopholes that allow Warren Buffett to brag about only paying 14% tax rates, that's just not right.
Absolutely.
The tax system is not fair. Republicans can afford to go along with cutting these tax loopholes, right, to raise more revenue.
Absolutely. We are, I mean, at least I can say most are for tax reform. Absolutely. Cut the loopholes. Do it fairly. Do it across the board for everyone. You know, I love to hear the oil companies are making so much money. Why shouldn't they pay more? Hey, if you start taxing people because they do well, then you're going to start tearing down all of industry. That's not tax policy.
Senator, what John Boehner said he was willing in these private negotiations, what he was willing to do was go one step further than that. He was willing to allow, in his version of the grand bargain, allow the Bush tax cuts on the higher, over $250,000 a year to expire, if that was coupled with the kind of tax reform you're talking about. So my question to you is, does that work for you politically?
Oh, you can do tax reform, but you have to do it as a package. You can't say for the promise of tax reform.
But you're willing to you would be willing to let the Bush tax cuts for people earning more than $250,000 a year. You'd be willing to let those expire at the end of 2012, so long as it was coupled with tax reform that would make fairer and flatter rates and get rid of loopholes like Joe's talking about.
If you have a tax reform that replaces the Bush tax cuts, that has a simpler, maybe 2 or 3 levels instead of more, I think all of us would like to look at that, yes, and I'd be for tax reform. Lower the rates on corporations so we're competitive globally. Take away the loopholes.
Well, not all of you in your party are willing to do that, because there are many in your party who think that by allowing those Bush tax cuts to expire, that's a tax increase and that we can't tolerate it.
Well,
that's in fact what we're hearing in the House right now.
Well, tax reform reform would bring in more revenue, but it would be across the board and more fair.
Senator, is what we're talking about, the closing of tax loopholes, flattening the rates within tax reform? Is that possible over the next few weeks as part of a debt ceiling package? Is that actually operationally possible?
That's a very good question. I do think that it could be possible, yes, but if you can't do all of the tying up of the loose ends, I mean, we do have until probably mid-August, so we could be running through the committee system right now. I think all of us would work 24/7 to run it through the processes, but if you couldn't, that's when you look at the short-term fix and say, okay, we are this close. We're all in agreement that a simpler, fairer tax code would be the way to go. You're going through the committee process. Maybe you do a 30, 60-day extension with some cuts to make sure that you're still going in the right direction. Yes, you could do that.
Well, this sounds like it could be a constructive conversation. Yeah. Chuck Todd, I mean, you're covering the meetings. There's another one, I believe, today in a news conference. Doesn't sound like they're that constructive when you hear the coverage over the weekend.
Well, it doesn't, and you do wonder. It's sort of there's two ways to go about this. Is the president going to? When does he have to? When does he decide he's going to back off his push for the big deal? Is he going to push for another couple of days and just keep getting no's? You know, sometimes you got to ask 4 or 5 times. Take the no, and eventually you might get the yes. Does he have to draw a line in the sand? I mean, I think ultimately, because he has talked about this concern about defaulting and the fact that you can't play games with this, that's also a message in negotiations by saying, look, he'll eventually be the first one to back down. He'll eventually be the one that will sign whatever short-term deal is necessary. But, you know, I'd love to see an experiment, and Senator Hutchison, I'm curious what you think. If you took the leadership out of this, and you basically said, let this plan, let there be sort of, I think there are 218 votes in the House. I can't tell you the makeup of it. And I think there are 60 votes in the Senate to do this. But if it's controlled by the leadership, then it will not get there. But if it's somehow leadership let everybody go and say, you know what, make your own decision on this, and you had different sets of whippings and all this stuff, I wonder, could you get it? Is there a majority? Because I bet you there is.
All right.
Well, your leadership is not going to allow something to go through that doesn't have the majority of their members. That's the Democrats or the Republicans. So I think you have to have leadership, particularly in the House where, you know, 435, it's kind of hard to just say, okay, y'all have at it. You've got to have a plan and then be able to amend a plan to get something through, I think.
All right, Senator, thank you for being with us. Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison. It's always great, and congratulations to the Dallas Mavericks.
Thank you, Joe.
We were with
what
them from the very beginning.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was nice.
We loved it.
All right, coming up.
And go girls on USA Soccer.
Amazing.
All right.
Girls. Oh,
amazing.
What a game.
Hey, Chuck Todd, stay with us if you will, because coming up next, we continue our conversation with Senator Chuck Schumer. Keep it right here on Morning Joe.